Good evening. We are very happy to welcome you to the second Mindwise Debate organized in collaboration with Studium Generale. Today on the topic of the relationship between experts and the public. My name is Valeria. I'm a student in the PCN Research Master and member of Mindwise, and together with Tassos, who is the editor-in-chief of Mindwise and lecturer at the psychology department, will be moderating this debate. Mindwise is the science communication platform of the psychology department, and Mindwise Debate started with the aim of bridging the gap between student members and staff members communities, and we wanted to create a platform for dialogue on topics we care about. And since the beginning of this academic year, we started a beautiful collaboration with Studium Generale, and we brought this platform to the university level. And today's topic is can be eloquently illustrated through this headline that you see on the screen, which reads, "Scientologist ship remains under measles quarantine in Caribbean scare." This suggests that there is schism between experts and the public, or the scientific community and the general community. And in the most extreme cases, this is manifested through people denying the value of vaccination, for example, or denying or holding beliefs that are at great odds with scientific truths, for example, denying the reality of climate change. In more mundane aspects of this relationship, the experts and the public just feel disconnected and maybe disinterested in the value that each of these groups can bring to the dialogue. And we're here to think about the reasons of why this may be the case. And there are various, and I think today's debate will address many of them. But primarily, we're here to try to find a solution or a relationship paradigm between experts and the general public, so that the communication between the two groups improves, and so that both of them can benefit from each other's existence and expertise.
So in this way, I guess we can think of two types of relationships between the public and experts or scientists or academics, however you want to define this notion of expertise. In one of these relationships, which I think reflects the current status quo more than anything else, experts are seen as educators. They're seen as being slightly higher in the hierarchy of truth-bearing, if you will, and their task is seen as science educators. Our role, or their role, is to inform the public, educate the public, and bring them sort of closer to their understanding of the truth. The other position, or the other type of relationship that you might imagine, involves a more egalitarian relationship between these two members, the public and experts, in which through a discussion and through this collaboration, both parties, both groups of individuals aim to change their opinions, aim to adapt, be educated, learn, and shape their own understanding of the world. So this brings us to our proposition for today, the way that we have phrased it in terms of a statement. Should the relationship between experts and the public be a hierarchical one? This is what the debate will be about today. And the two teams that are going to be debating this topic and trying to give us as much nuance on this as possible are a team for this proposition, who are seated on my right and to your left, and a team against this proposition seated on my left and on your right. And on my right, we have Aline Rotaru-Segal, who is a student of psychology. We have Marcela Fratescu, who is a BCN research master student, and Martin Derksen, who is professor in the psychology department in theory and history. And on my left, in the team against this proposition, Marton Iritz, who is a student of chemical engineering, Rebecca Perez, who is a student of energy and environmental sciences, and Lucy Avramidou, who is a professor in science education and communication.
And the structure of today's event has two main components. The first part is structured debate unfolding in accordance with the Karl Popper debating format. And the aim of this part is to basically illustrate the topic in a time-efficient and comprehensive manner and not determine a winning team. Also, the positions supported by the debaters within this part are not necessarily in line with their professional or personal stance. After the formal part of the debate, we will open the discussion to the audience, and everyone can contribute to further exploring this topic by asking questions to the debaters or by commenting what has been said. And before starting the formal part of the debate, we'd like to ask you to keep the applause until the formal part is over. And as a note to the speakers, we'll be keeping time, and we have the two cards with which will indicate how much time you have left of your speeches.
I'm going to contradict my co-host and ask you for a second to welcome our speakers with a round of applause. The controversy begins, and I would like to invite Alin Rotaro-Segal to open the formal part of this debate with his opening statement for the proposition. No, you stay behind your microphone.
Perfect sense. Okay. Forgive me, I have this tendency to talk over the time limit, so please throw any object you can find at me when I pass that limit. I'll start my speech with there is no place like home. In the story of The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, we follow the protagonist, a young farm girl, Dorothy, on her path to achieving mental maturity. She is instructed by a supernatural figure, the Good Witch of the North, representing, one could argue, truth and wisdom, to follow the yellow brick road, at the end of which she will meet the great and powerful Oz, the only entity that could help her go home. In a dramatic reveal, Oz is revealed to be nothing else than a man. It is this revelation that paradoxically gives great freedom to Dorothy and her friends, not just by dethroning a false prophet, but by realizing that the means of obtaining understanding and fulfilling their desires lies within the self. That one needs only with patience to individually and practically interact with the world to slowly separate reality from spectacle. In a way, Dorothy thus gains what Harry Collins, the British sociologist, calls local discrimination, a meta-expertise that allows her to pinpoint fallacies in other people's narratives. Science is the pursuit of knowledge through practical means. It creates narratives about how the world works, but these have to be faced with the world. How you define this external world is a matter of debate, either envisioning it as cold and dead or as complex and dynamic. What is key is that through the progress of this epistemological pursuit, humanity has a common referential system that we can use not only to facilitate technological and economical cooperation, but to face global challenges like climate change. Of course, some narratives are better than others in explaining and predicting phenomena, and some observations don't fit with the current leading narratives in any specific scientific field. These paradoxes, groups of anomalous results, are the very fuel on which revolutionary science runs, as Thomas Kuhn points out in The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. The person who navigates these narratives actively is the scientific expert. In the 1950s, with the technological miracles of splitting the atom, the invention of nylon, and curing polio, the figure of the scientific expert was that of a distant, highly competent initiate, capable of piercing the veil of appearances and grasping the very core of reality. The public remained there as the receivers of these blessings, incapable of resisting the narrative put forward. But as Collins suggests in Are We All Experts Now?, we are today, as a society, faced with the fall of a curtain and the revelation that a scientist is, after all, just human. Stories of scientists being manipulated by corporations to produce results that further their product, the failure of econometrics to predict the financial crisis, as well as many reports of scientists fabricating data, have caused the authority of the scientific establishment as a whole to be questioned. After all, why do we need scientific experts? Isn't any John Doe capable of deciding for himself whether the earth is flat or not, whether vaccines cause autism or not, whether climate change is real. He has, after all, so much information at his fingertips. The answer, as we shall see, is a resounding no. The confusion here is twofold. We first confuse an idyllic potted history of science with the real thing. We expect heroes having eureka moments, and we ignore the real process. The slowness at which knowledge grows, the scrutiny that is involved, and specificity of the eventual conclusions. Furthermore, we confuse our own basic knowledge about science, what Collins calls ubiquitous tacit knowledge, with the interactional expertise that can only be gained by interacting with people working in the same specific domain, expertise which include the capacity to judge what counts as good and what counts as bad science. In 1999, in South Africa, the President Thabo Mbeki decided not to distribute any antiretroviral drugs to certain at-risk groups, citing articles that showed that the drugs were toxic and could do more harm than good. The articles he cited were of poor quality and would have been recognized as such by any person with an understanding of how the scientific community works. The researchers in question had been marginalized by the scientific community for their views, and a consensus existed in regards to the safety of these drugs. In this case, we have a non-expert cherry-picking the results that do not fit his agenda, not having to commit public funds to the program. The sociologist of science, Robert Merton, sorry? Oh, thanks. The sociologist of science, Robert Merton, suggested in 1942 a set of ideals that he envisioned should lie at the foundation of any true scientific endeavor. They include communism, the common ownership of scientific discoveries, according to which scientists give up intellectual property in exchange for recognition and esteem, universalism, according to which claims that truth are evaluated in terms of universal or impersonal criteria and not on the basis of race, class, gender, religion, or nationality. Disinterestedness, according to which scientists are rewarded for acting in ways that outwardly appear to be selfless. And organized skepticism. All ideas must be tested and are subject to rigorous, structured community scrutiny. It is the duty of the scientists to aspire to these goals despite the economic and ideological pressure. This is ending statement. This is fundamentally emancipatory. We have gained, like Dorothy, with the revelation of postmodernism, the awareness that science is just one of many ways of knowing the world, and that is itself extremely culturally conditioned. Life is complicated. Now we have the option to use this knowledge to gain more nuance and robustness in the face of ambivalences. Or we can follow a nihilistic, relativistic path. In the face of global crises, we need to return credibility to facts, complex, nuanced facts that may not have a particular agenda, but facts nonetheless. Because, in the words of Dorothy, there is no place like home.
We continue with counter questioning from Lucia Bramido from the other team.
Thank you, Ali. I want to start from one phrase. I'm going to use that phrase that you used in your speech, that scientists are humans. So my question is, if we assume that scientists are humans, then one could also assume that they are selfish, they are driven by biases, subjective beliefs, limitations in skills and abilities, and possibly political agendas. So my question is, why should the public trust them?
Science is a?
Scientists are humans.
Is a human?
Humans are humans.
Scientists are humans. Yes, they are humans. And we should be discouraged. My point is that we should be discouraged in being skeptical about human nature. We should take any hypothesis as to how our society can be, including the role of science in it, and just wait for that hypothesis to face scrutiny and face the facts. We have been known in our history to be unreliable as a source of truth. True. But in the same time, I think we shouldn't use history to predict how we are going to develop in the future as a society. There's a Brazilian philosopher called Roberto Unger, and he has this theory of false necessity, that our future, including technological revolution, shouldn't be predicted according to previous enterprises. Yeah.
You still have time if you have more
Yeah.
questions.
So you actually agree with me that we shouldn't trust the experts?
No. I am under the belief that there are certain points that could make you skeptical about our ability to be objective and so forth. But we should trust that humanity can better itself, and including the scientific community can become more objective and open and transparent.
Mm-hmm. So in a way, you're saying that the future doesn't depend on the past.
Yes.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay. We continue with the opening statement for the team against this proposition with Marton Iritz.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm tired of our experts failing miserably on every level. I brought a few numbers to demonstrate why. What I have here is a study done by King's College in London that was looking at experts' representation in mass media. They found that, and I will read this out, I hope you don't mind that, 47% of the experts that appear on BBC, CNN, MSNBC, and other such mediums are falsified within the year of their appearance. Even worse, 95% of them never bother to clear up their falsified statements. Experts do come clean, tend to lose public credibility, and can experience a 32% decrease in their citation frequency. And the public's reaction, not very good either. 55% of us see scientific experts as incompetent to solve the problem at hand, and 18% of us are outright blaming them to be the cause of catastrophes such as Fukushima and the economic crisis of 2008. Professor Dr. Lawrence Lang, leader of the research group, summarized the findings as, and I quote, "shameful for the experts and deeply concerning for the community." It doesn't sound very good, does it? So what has led to us being distrustful towards experts? And why are experts failing to communicate their ideas towards us? I think the root of the problem runs deeper than miscommunication, attitude, or manipulation. Experts are struggling to find a place in society at the brink of a new academic era that the internet has brought us. In the old days, to get educated, people would have had to travel hundreds of kilometers to learn from masters of the art. These masters were possessing most, if not all, accumulated knowledge up to that point. With the introduction of the internet, however, all of a sudden everyone gains access to publications of all scientific fields. The only thing that remains institutionalized is accreditation. You can learn, apply to learn, and use all knowledge up to master's level, pretty much, with a few exceptions. But the proof that you can do so is still connected to universities. This has really shaken up the scientific status quo, so much so that experts feel an insecurity about their future roles. And in order to maintain maintain a division between themselves and the public, they will support a more elitist and hierarchical division between science. They have many tools at hand. Exercising their intellectual superiority is just one of them. They also overuse jargon and use status symbols like stethoscopes and lab coats to maintain this division. Nothing shows this more than the expert failed attempts against pseudoscience, like we just saw, against anti-vaxxers, flat earthers, or Brexit. Their fact-based counter-reasoning seems to be ineffective when emotions are involved. It shouldn't be like that. Being an expert and being a scientist is a vocation, and as such is rather emotional. It is about understanding more and better, and hardly about knowing more. And that's where most experts fail. When talking to us, they tend to focus on knowledge and facts, and not about the underlying processes. This further solidifies the distrust in the public eye. And as such, the expert became a trope, a cliche, if you will. An expert became a target for parody through caricature, magnifying their core attributes. These attributes are someone that thinks high of him herself, someone that uses numbers and jargon to mystify the problem at hand, hiding the inner workings of the problem at hand, the problems that are affecting us. And in turn, they confuse us, which makes it easier to manipulate us. And as much as we would hate to believe it, we can be victims of fake experts too. Maybe you look at me, you see me on the stage wearing a shirt, glasses and everything, great vocabulary, sometimes forgetting my topic, but that's okay. Hiding the, and then I come with the numbers, Professor Dr. Lawrence Lang, King's College, some more numbers, and the fancy sounding, wise sounding quote. Sounds credible, right? Wrong. Everything I said about the research was made up. I lied to you. And many of you did believe me, didn't you? I believe that the expansion of the internet can bring a desired change, shifting this expert-public relationship from the hierarchical structures of the past into the more egalitarian one of the future. But until then, let this experience be a reminder to all of you to never fall victims of experts and that are fake manipulating you. Be an active member of scientific debate. Do the research yourself and look for the credible evidence yourself, because you have more chance to do so than in any other time of the history before. Thank you so much. Oh, jeez.
From the team for the proposition, Martin Derksen will cross-examine.
Thank you. I just have a few questions of clarification. You said anybody nowadays can get sufficient knowledge up to master's level just by reading or internet or whatever is available on the internet.
You want me to agree with myself again? Yes.
But then afterwards you said, but science is not about facts, it's about understanding. Is that
It's
correct?
about understanding, indeed. I do see the contradiction that you kind of want to point out here, but I would like to hear what you want to.
So are you saying that science in practice nowadays is all about facts, with experts sort of proclaiming facts, whereas science should be about understanding, or?
No, science has always been about understanding. When people look up to the sky and think about the stars, they are not wondering what is there. They want to know how it works, and it's always been about understanding. What has shifted is the communication about this. People see us scientists and experts as arbiters of the truth, you know. And this is where I think experts have failed us, is that they have ill-represented science towards the public.
They transmit a view of science as a collection of facts, basically, without any understanding involved.
Look, if you go on Facebook, you can scroll through, and sometimes you hear all these sociology examples. Let's say, if you like gin and tonic, scientists have proven if you like gin and tonic, then you're a sociopath, right? People do not understand that when a research like this is done, what goes into that. People think, at least because people don't have an understanding of how science works, and that's where I think the experts have okay, they have been bombarding us with facts, but come on, show us the process, show us the data, and teach people that the real problem is is how science works. Is that people should be introduced into that.
Excellent. Thank you.
We continue with a speech from Marcella Fratescu from the team for the proposition.
So, before we start looking into ways on how to make the communication between scientists or experts and the public an effective one, we need to ask and answer a question. What is an expert? We might be tempted to think that common expertise is sufficient in order to have a good and meaningful discussion between an expert and a member of the general public. However, there is numerous examples of this type that prove that such a discussion on an equal level is rarely productive and often very chaotic. One reason why is because scientists use technical jargon and complex language when talking in their field. And this can often sound misleading when taken out of the context and put into the general use. Take one example from a climate change scandal in 2009, where emails of researchers at the Climate Change Institute were published online, and one of them reads the following: "I've just completed Mike's nature trick of adding in the real temperatures to each series in order to hide the decline." This might sound incriminating to the scientists who possibly manipulated their data in order to fit an agenda. And this might sound incriminating unless we know that Mike was the author of this email and Science is the journal that this paper was published in, and that the trick involves nothing else than a procedural cleaning of data before you actually analyze it. Put into different words, certain amount of expertise is needed in order to provide us with the context in order to understand and talk about complex problems. Oh, no. And this is where common sense fails us. That, however, does not mean that the public is a passive recipient of information. The experience that the public has with scientific knowledge is of utmost importance into shaping the questions that scientists look into, as well as the methods that they do this with. Take an example where you go to the doctor to change or adjust your medication because of an injury. The doctor will look into your symptoms and side effects and the extremeness of those in order to prescribe you a new drug. The fact that the first drug didn't work does not invalidate the expertise of the doctor. On the other side, the patient doesn't need to know the exact molecular basis on which this drug acts in order to benefit from it. Lastly, the most important role that the public has when communicating with experts is that of an ethical supervisor. And what I mean by that is critically assessing the motives, the financial and the personal interests of the scientists, especially on problems that directly affect the members of the general community, and that's in policy making and in health. We can easily discredit the controversy of vaccines causing autism if we were to know that the author of the paper who initiated this scandal was funded by drug companies. To sum up, the hierarchy instantiated when communicating between experts and the public does nothing more than impose a role for those two partakers of this conversation. On one hand, we have the expert who puts countless hours into looking into a problem and figuring out a way to solve it. And on the other hand, we have the public who feeds back into this process with its own experience of the truth that scientists create, all in order to better human life and society and to progress in finding out solutions for the problems we have, rather than keep restating the same problem again and again.
Thank you, Marcella. Marton cross-examines from the other team.
My question is, yes, technological advancement has two main pushing effects. One is, it's called technology push and market pull. And market pool has always been about the customers, and I always feel like that's more of the public. But technology push has always been from the experts. And we see often that when there is a sort of technology push, sometimes the market is just not there. Let's say foldable phones. Maybe they did it because they could, but not because we wanted. In a situation like this, how would the expert react to seeing that the public is not in alignment with their kind of advancements and the things that they want to see on the market, or this can be also interpreted in a way that where money is being put in research, for example.
Right. So if I understand your question correctly, what drives scientific progress is the values of fairness and uninterestedness of scientists that come to discover through this process, the scientific process, come to discover novelties and make up devices that can either be picked up by the public or not. That doesn't necessarily make the public a consumer in this regard. And I think my point of giving, having a sort of feedback, constructive feedback of the public upon the knowledge that is instantiated upon them is of importance when it comes to whether the foldable phones would stand the test of time or something else new will come on the market.
Mm-hmm. Wouldn't that require the public to be also more engaged in the science behind it?
Would you like the public to make those technical advances themselves? Because they cannot. What they can do is provide the perspective of, in this case, consumers of those phones and what they like about that interface or what they don't like. And then it is the actual scientists that do the change in order to, for the public to benefit from it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. I will finish it here.
Okay, on this note, we continue with a statement from the team against the proposition by Rebecca Perez.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. In the next few minutes, I would like to reflect on the outdated, sometimes elitist standing of experts, because tension is rising between the experts and the public. And this is a direct cause of their often patronizing behavior towards the public. When all people need is open dialogue, transparency, and mutual respect. Anything else should not be tolerated by any of us. Why would we tolerate it from experts? Let's take politicians, for example. One of the main, most novel statements of democracy is that politicians are public servants. These leader figures, regardless how superior they might seem, are only there to ensure our well-being. I mean, sometimes it's only theory, don't get me wrong. But what I'm trying to say is that that's what we as a society expect from our public servants. So, for example, let's take climate change researchers or cancer researchers. They are all there to help us to serve society in that sense. So let me assume for a second that we in this room can agree that experts should have the vision of serving a common good. Then we have to acknowledge that public should be more involved in this expert work, just as we demand to be involved in politics. Instead of being patronized, we want to know what's happening. Do we not have the right to be functioning participants in these common issues? So following this train of thought, we absolutely need to rethink the relationship between experts and the public. At the moment, the public is just being served with final results and instructions by experts, how to use your phone. But there is minimal attempt to make the public understand why or how these results are taking place. The public does not have a platform to interact with science, not even to question its outcomes. If that happened in politics, it would not be tolerated. Long story short, This old-fashioned structure does not fit in our modern society. Experts have shut us out from their little elite club with no concern to the public. No wonder we are losing trust and interest. And this is very dangerous, especially towards our young people who feel excluded as well. Without their curiosity, without their interest, where will the next generation of experts will emerge from? According to Smithsonian Education Center, 2.4 million science and engineering jobs out there cannot get the desired experts anymore. This is equivalent of almost 100 universities as big as ours, echoing empty. In an age where science-related jobs are rapidly increasing, and we are facing a number of global issues such as climate change screaming for professionals, let me ask again, where will the reinforcement and the support come from in these challenging times for experts? Well, seems like you need us after all. Well, good news, we need you too. It is time to build mutual relationship and cooperation for our common goals, because our goals are common, and involving us in your research could help both sides in better understanding. Dear experts out there, it is time to open up for the public. Show your research, tell us its relevance, show your limitations and uncertainties as well. Admit that there is so much you cannot solve. It will not make you vulnerable. Quite the opposite. It will show honesty and openness, so we can actually trust you and stand behind you and help you wherever we can. I'm sorry to drag you down from your high horses, but apart from that, your narrow expertise, you are one of us, you are the public, and we are all in this together. Thank you.
Aline cross-examines from the other team.
I applaud your declaration that the public doesn't have a platform to interact with society and that you're for a more transparent and open science. But I'm unsure as to how abolishing the hierarchies would look like, and how would the science be made in that situation.
I think what I was trying to say is that we want direct connection with science, not media, let's say. So if the public can only be served with scientific results if they are outrageous, if they are like, pushing the button and like, very exciting, not like when they are maybe seem to be boring and, not that exciting by media. So the direct connection is missing because what Martin has expressed as well, that scientists seem to use jargon and they're only like publishing scientific paper and not, for example, a more easier consuming version of their research, not just like very sophisticated reports, but you could actually communicate your research to the public as well. It doesn't take long. And this part is missing. And that's why the public feels that they are like being looked down. They are like, because they are not, the scientists don't try to involve them. So they feel like they are outside of this club and they feel like they cannot interact with science. That's what I meant by the platform that is missing. Mm-hmm. Obviously, you can, as Martin said as well, you can find things on Facebook about science, but that's maybe not the best way to know about science.
So leaving outside influences aside, you agree that at the very technical level of experts dealing with maybe very hard to grasp concepts for the layperson, there shouldn't be outside involvement at the level of experiments, at the level of...
Why not? I think it's very arrogant to think that no one will understand your research. Mm-hmm. I think maybe giving it a go. But one of my favorite professors once told me that you only understand your research if you can explain it to a child. If you can't explain it to a child, you can only explain it with jargons and like 100 pages reports. maybe you have to rethink if you actually understand your research. And I think it's very important. No one should tell me that their research is so sophisticated that it cannot be understood by the public. I think that's highly arrogant to say so.
Thank you.
We come to the closing act of the formal part of this debate. First, with a closing statement for the team for the proposition by Martin Derksen.
Thank you, Tassos. I think we are, in certain respects, closer to each other than where we've put by the organizers, except for a few points. So we were given the task of arguing for this hierarchy, and I think we've taken up that point at least willingly, because our arguments have been based on the idea that expertise is inherently hierarchical. If there is a difference in expertise between people, there is a difference in power between these people. Expertise is by nature unequally distributed. And if we follow this debate's conception of expertise as institutionally sanctioned scientific expertise, then we cannot all be experts on everything. This is just how things are. The other team has argued, yes, but nowadays we have the internet and we can all read, and so we can acquire all this expertise. Experts have more or less been pretending that what they know is all very difficult and hard to learn, but with a bit of effort we can all have that expertise. We have argued that it is not that easy. It's not easy to raise a difference in expertise. It does take more than reading a few books. We've argued that expertise to some extent consists of tacit knowledge, which can only be learned by being with, interacting with, working with other experts, not just by reading Wikipedia or even journal articles. You acquire expertise by being part of a community of experts. So that hierarchy is real and inevitable. Pretending that we can sort of have an equal conversation between experts and lay people is not helpful for anybody. And contrary to what was just said, I think that pretending that we can have this equal conversation, that is patronizing. Pretending that we're all on the same level and that lay people can have a conversation with us on the same level, that is patronizing. In fact, I think that the public expects and wants a hierarchical relation because it wants to hear from the experts what might be the case, what can be done, what is the matter, etc. The public, I don't like the term the public, but that's the one we've been using so far. The public does not want a conversation on equal terms. I also don't think that the public rejects expertise. On the contrary, it seeks out expertise feverishly, almost. Sure, there's climate skepticism, but climate skepticism is not a rejection of expertise, it's a search for an alternative expertise. Neither is it a rejection of hierarchy, it is a rejection of particular sources of power, it's a rejection of globalism, maybe. We've argued that to improve the standing of expertise, its acceptance by the public, we shouldn't level the playing field and invite everybody to join in. Rather, we should educate the public about what expertise is, how it works. We've called that meta-expertise. The public needs knowledge about how science works in practice. And here we agree with something that was said on the other side. One thing that has soured the relations between experts and public is that the public often seems to have an unrealistic view of what science is, how it works. And this view has often been fostered by experts themselves. It is a view of the expert as sort of a purveyor of objective truth, pure and untainted by earthly temptations such as money or fame. And it is a view of expertise that inevitably will lead to disappointment. Thank you.
There's no cross-examination on the closing statement, so we move on immediately with a closing statement by Lucy Avramidou.
Thank you. We're still tired of experts. We have fallen out of love with experts. Why? Because they're elitist. And elitism is fundamentally destructive to both science and society. Experts have established themselves as an authority, and they attack everyone who questions them in any way. They take away from us, the public, the right to feel skeptical. But we are skeptical because we know that science can be dangerous. Think of a nuclear explosion, for example. Experts control the curriculum in schools, they control the curriculum in universities, and consequently they control the society as well. But the society, the public, is excluded from science. We are tired of experts because just knowing stuff isn't enough. We need experts to not only know stuff, but to also be honest, moral, and care about the public good. And so far, they have proved that they are not honest, they are not moral, and they do not care about the public good. Not always, at least. Instead, they have proved that they are selfish and elitist and narcissist and immoral. They talk to us, the public, in a way that makes no sense. They talk to us, the public, in ways that put us down. They talk to us, the public, in ways that devalue us. They are the ones that do the talking, and we are the ones supposed to do the listening. They are the ones who produce knowledge, and we are the ones supposed to consume this knowledge without questioning it. They are the elite, we are the common people. Plus, they change their minds quite often. I still don't know if it's good for me, for my health, to have 2 eggs for breakfast. Experts always talk about their products, but never about the processes of science. The processes of science resemble a black box whose internal workings are hidden. Paradoxically, while the experts and their products are always on stage, in the newspapers, in the magazines, in TED Talks, in social media, the processes of scientific research remain behind the scene, essentially a mystery for the public. What scientists do in their laboratories all day? What kinds of data do they collect? How do they analyze those data to form conclusions? Remains a mystery for everyone else but them. What mistakes do they make, and how do they make up for those mistakes? What personal beliefs and biases influence their work? What politics drive their research? What governmental interests fund their research? Why do they raise certain questions but not others? What questions make them uncomfortable? Another crucial question is the following. What moral responsibility do experts take about the negative consequences of scientific knowledge? For example, if scientific knowledge is used in a biological attack, the terrorists are first and foremost responsible. But aren't the experts who generated the knowledge also responsible? These are the issues we never hear about. The moral responsibility of science, the ethical dilemmas, the mistakes, the values, the biases, the politics of science. We are left in the dark as passive consumers that experts like us to be. We have fallen out of love with experts. We have fallen in love with the public because the public can lead the way in reconstructing how scientific issues are talked about and debated and raise the key uncomfortable questions that scientists often do not ask. Thank you.
This concludes the formal part of the debate, and I think it's fair to conclude this part of the debate with a round of applause for all 6 speakers. we gave them a very difficult puzzle to deal with today, and I think they've done an incredibly good job. But they're not done yet, because this is only half of their task for today. The other half is for them to talk with you and answer your questions and deal with your comments. And I'll leave that part for
We'll have
Valeria.
a microphone traveling through the room, so if you have a question, raise your hand, but also indicate to whom your question is addressed. It can be addressed to one speaker or to a whole team. And we'll also have a paper traveling around where you can leave your name and email address in case you want to participate in future debates. And I give it to you. You can take it.
Okay. Kirsten Bertram.
I would like to challenge all of you. And that is that I think that the questions we are debating tonight come from a wrong philosophical attitude. That we have moved into an era where having an opinion is more important than forming an opinion. And this is why all the problems we are discussing arise. Because if the public is not interested in forming an opinion, and the expert is not interested in helping the layperson to form an opinion, we come to the state of matter that we have discussed tonight.
Yeah.
No, I just wanted to ask to Rebecca Beres that actually my wife is a professor of physics and I cannot understand her articles. But for my own pleasure as an artist, I read The New Scientist every week where I inform myself. There's also a Dutch version. There are programs on TV. So I do think that the scientists try to make it understandable for the public. Not only, I can add to Lucy, that the Dutch government just 2 days ago published in the NRC, as they do every time, an advertisement that in the milieu, here in the environment, modified organisms are being released, or at least they go into, because of scientific studies, also at UMCG. So they do try to inform the public. I think that honestly, the public doesn't care much, because these are facts. Facts are not fun. And you need some knowledge, going back to what she says. So I think they are there, they just that nobody noticed them when they're there.
Yeah, it wasn't actually a question, it was a very interesting insight, but I would still like to make a comment. I think that was very interesting that you said science is about facts, and people are not interested in facts. But that is what I would like to challenge, because science isn't always about facts. That's the problem. That what you see in Science Direct, or what that is, they try to publish it as they are unquestionable facts. But most of the time, if you dig deeper, you realize that science is full of uncertainties, and these facts are not always as obvious as scientists are claiming to say so. It's like even questioning like, even questioning like very basic principles like gravity. You could see like throughout history there were like so many different ideas about gravity, and every single era they would like publish it as a fact, and after there would other era come, and if public would be served with these scientific issues as a journey of exploring the world, the universe, not like this is how it is, period. You can't question that. Then maybe they would be more interested and they would be more involved in these discussions. That's the problem, that it is being communicated as a fact. Anything.
Because science is in its nature open to new hypotheses. They just say, till today we've learned this, but we're open to change our mind and contradict ourselves even next week if somebody comes up with a better understanding.
So do you think
it's true? They always say, this is what we understand today. It's the nature of science. They always say it.
So you think it's always, this message is always so obvious in scientific articles?
Scientists, I think, give this message. If the public doesn't want to listen to this message, it's, I don't know whose fault, but the scientists never say, this is the truth. They just say, this is what I understand today, with the means I have, the machines, my brain, but I'm open to be contradicted by my student in 1 year. A good scientist should accept this.
Yeah, a
A
good
good
scientist
scientist,
should,
indeed.
yeah.
And that's what I think. I'm sorry to take them. Do you mind?
Please.
Yeah, you were just saying that people are more interested in forming opinions rather the other way around. Have an opinion rather than forming one. Yeah, but that also comes back, I think, to the time to what your husband is saying is that I think there is no. Scientists are not communicating this kind of paradigms that science is only works in paradigms, or our current understanding verifies the things that we think. For example, there was this guy in the 17th or 18th century. He was one of the fathers of thermodynamics. He started thinking. He understood that there is a hot surface has something in it that the cold surface doesn't, and when they get in contact, there is a sort of exchange happening. He was thinking it's a weightless gas. Later, obviously, we understand its entropy and molecular vibrations. But to him, his calculations still made sense. Once there was a better understanding coming that explained more things better, that's when scientists moved on to a new paradigm. That is maybe to your husband then. Your problem. You stated something very important that is actually a political problem. I think more than where we live in a time of post-truth and fake news and all that. No? Is it a no or a yes?
It's a philosophical problem. If we move into an era, as we have moved now, where having an opinion is more important than forming an opinion, we come to the problems that we have discussed tonight.
And what is your question, Petra? I'm still trying to understand what the question is.
The question was if you don't think that this is really the basis of what we are discussing, and not the attitude of wanting to be arrogant or not arrogant or things like that.
Maybe the other group can also say something.
So, forming an opinion requires somebody to have a rational system of beliefs, right? Where you, when provided with evidence that is contrary to what you believe, you say, I'm wrong, this is no longer what I believe, I will believe something else. And I think this is something that is very present in the scientific community. You need to have good arguments in order to convince your opponents that your hypothesis is correct and theirs is wrong. And this is something that we don't necessarily see a lot in the general public. This is where forming an opinion is not really present. And this could, yeah.
Yes, I think so too. Science, there is no, when there is an election, and this comes back to Rebecca's politics parallel to science kind of thing, we don't see on television the Newtonian and Einsteinian physics, kind of debating and brawling it out. There is no debate. There is only the truth being said, and or like at least the truth, what they would say, like to hear it as the truth. There is no, in order to form opinions, not only do you have to just be stated with or faced with facts, you also have to challenge those facts so that you can further solidify your belief in that fact, if that made sense to you.
Let's give the microphone to a few. Yeah, thank you.
I have a question for Mr. Derksen. Do you think there's a contradiction between the relationship between experts and the public, as you stated, the hierarchy, and democracy? Because if experts are the experts and right, for the moment, then what is my role as public in a democracy? What room for decision making do I have other than following the experts? And maybe this also touches upon your question, because if I don't have any room for forming my own opinion, I'm not asked to form an opinion, I'm asked to follow the experts' lead. So, yeah, what's the relationship between democracy and a technocracy?
So, first of all, this relationship is not easy. And there are many examples of how democratic relationships and relationships of expertise are difficult to combine. But I do think that we shouldn't think in absolutes. We shouldn't think, well, these are fundamentally different things, like, you know, oil and water, and they will never mix. Making expertise useful in a democracy requires work. It requires smoothing over tensions. It requires maintaining a useful boundary between expertise and democratic processes. And we manage these boundaries all the time, but it is work. But I think it would be a mistake to think here that, well, these are, expertise is not democratic. This is what we've been arguing. And I think most people here would agree that it's not just, you know, it's not just taking votes. Making expertise useful in a democracy is always tricky, but it is possible.
I don't have a question, I just want to throw something at you. And I want to get back to the point that was made, the difference between having an opinion and forming an opinion. And I think it's very important to understand that a large swath of the public is having an opinion in a tribal way. They are not that interested in what is underneath their opinion. They take their opinion like a football jersey to show on which team they are. And that's a very recent thing, absolutely. But it's very important to understand, I think, because we're talking about two different things. Two different kinds of, as you said. Well, I just wanted to throw that out.
Would somebody like to comment on this?
I can.
Yeah.
Right. So I think this recency of having an opinion rather than forming one is a sort of side effect of being bombarded with so much information and not knowing exactly the processes through which this information arrived at. And I think this is where I will contradict, or not contradict, my initial position, but put a bit more responsibility on the expert side to educate the public in how science works as a process. So you're not going to question how this result was arrived at, and whether this is a reliable or valid result to take in the first place, if you don't really know what science does to arrive at those results. And I think this is where critically educating the public about how science works, about how to be critical in terms of, I don't know, understanding basic statistical concepts in order to be able to read and critically more or less evaluate scientific papers. And I think this will help the public go from having an opinion to forming one through uncertainties and through, yeah.
Sorry, may I react to also the man? There's, and I think here what Marcella says, yes, we are bombarded with information, but the information that is arriving to us is very selected by certain algorithms of Facebook and all that. And this forms this confirmation bias, meaning that you're living in basically an information bubble. This information bubble leads you to believe that everyone that doesn't agree with you is either a hypocrite or a liar. This is not a healthy relationship that we're having currently. And this kind of polarization effect, I really don't want to see it go any further, personally, in science or in politics, because in this way there is no truth seeking. It's about having an opinion. And well, the political framing has always been a big problem, especially, for example, right now we see it with the Great Green New Deal in America. This is something that is actually a very scientific based, proposition about economy and ecology and all that. But the only thing that the media can focus on is why the Democrats, how it's going to affect the Democrats and the Republicans. They are not focusing on the underlying science or the possible effects of the deal itself. So, does that?
I'd like to shift a little bit and bring this to more like a real perspective. As like research is not something cheap, right? So it's extremely expensive, and all scientists, they're based on grant proposals to maintain their research. And maybe this is a question for either sides, but maybe more to the side against. But like, have you guys taken into consideration that also you have to, like, as a scientist, the majority of the money that comes is from the government. And you have a lot of different institutions within the government that they are regulating this. They're not, like, these grants, they're extremely competitive. So it's not that something that the scientists, I would like to research something which is completely unrelated to society and you get the money. Actually, you have to form a line of thinking which has to follow something which is useful for society. And like for centuries, science itself was not, let's say, featured that way. So in a way, I would argue that, well, in a way, the population is our boss also, right? And the scientist boss. So like, I'd like to have some thoughts of like either sides to what you think about this.
Mm-hmm. First of all, I would like to reflect on the government subsidies that you were referring to. Where does the government money come from? Yeah. So I think just as we claim to be informed about like what politics is doing and what is happening in the politics sphere, we have the right to be more informed about what is happening in science and in the academic field, for example. And I know it's like, for many of you, it's probably very outrageous to compare academics to politicians that much, but it is highly expensive to organize political campaigns. It is highly expensive to organize voting, for example, but we still do it. We are not gonna just say like, no, sorry guys, you can't vote. We are not gonna inform you about what's happening in the government because it's too expensive, and it's still the right thing to do. So it doesn't matter how expensive it is, if we want to live in kind of democracy. I don't want to go too far, but with experts as well, we have to demand our right of being informed, especially if, as you pointed it out, it's even our money as well going into these researches. So it doesn't matter how expensive it is to, make public well-informed and make public learn how to form an opinion, do it, because it's our right.
So I would just cite an example from the US. Well, that's my reference point, is that like the government has some, from time to time, open hearings that they explain. For example, I think the latest ones were about nuclear disarmament. There was 3 people in the audience. It's like something which is open and broadcasted on the internet. So like I would argue that yes, the scientific community is making an effort to communicate this, and also you see that within the scientific community, you see more people transitioning to how to translate what like a scientific paper means to layman's language. But yet there's these outrage when something is not being done correctly or like they don't understand. So I think that like it's also within the public's interest that like they don't want to understand this.
Hi, I think this is for both sides, but I'm just wondering if we're confusing anti-expertise with anti-elitism because of things like globalization and inequality. That obviously, like in America, the whole Trump thing is like a working class man's thing, and people feel left behind, and all these benefits from science might be not trickling down. It might not be that people don't really trust they know what they're doing, it's just that the benefits of the science, etc., isn't trickling down.
Is this for somebody in particular, or for... Would somebody like to take this?
Would you mind repeating the main statement of the question?
Yeah, so it seems like there might be an anti-elitism thing rather than specifically anti-expertise because of like the benefits of all this science and stuff aren't, and globalization aren't going to the working class people.
Isn't it? Sorry. Isn't it like elite to go to university and you're basically part of just 1%, so to say. So I think the elitist and expertise division is not. It's a blurry division.
Martin, you had, I think, a statement.
So when we argue for this hierarchical relationship as important in for the relationship between experts and the public, we're not arguing for elitism. Elitism is a matter of whose interests you serve, I think. And we certainly don't want to say that experts need to serve the interests of the powerful or the rich or whoever. Serving the people is good enough for me, I would say. And I would agree that anti-elitism is a part of the reaction against expertise. But we wouldn't want to argue for an elitist science.
I think there's a fundamental problem in this question because we're setting an imbalanced relationship between forming an opinion and having an opinion when this should be a continuous process. I don't think you can have an opinion until you can state it and form it. So it's not a matter of what should I do first. It's a matter of I first form an opinion and then I state it and then I build up on it and then I form it. And then if you just assume that there's I don't know, like it's better to have an opinion and not form one, you're implying a hierarchy that would delimitate between what's a good opinion and a bad opinion, so you automatically assume that there's a judge that could, decide on what's good and what's not, and that's actually having a hierarchy.
Thank you. Yep, I agree with that. Perhaps the distinction between forming an opinion and having an opinion, it might not be very helpful. We might want to think in terms of having an opinion and having an evidence-based opinion. And we are arguing for the experts to support the public to form an evidence-based opinion. And this is our main argument, basically. So we're not anti-expertise, we're not anti-science. We are arguing for a more democratic and dialogical relationship between the experts and the public for the purpose of supporting the public to form an evidence-based opinion, to be provided with the knowledge and skills needed to navigate between scientific evidence and scientific knowledge.
Are we pointing it? Well,
thank you. Now I guess we've determined who are experts and expertise. But I guess we also should determine who are public. Now we are just debating that it seems that psychology experts is asking accountability from physics scientists. But there are a lot of books by William Easterly, that is Tyranny of Experts, White Man's Burden, about development experts working in Africa, in third world countries. And there, I don't want to bring examples from his books because he has very subjective, because he has personal relations, I guess, with Jeffrey Sachs, but there's a book about Jeffrey Sachs, written by Nina Monk, The Idealist. There she explains the work of development experts. She says that development experts are obsessed with the idea, and they do not always pay attention to the needs of the poor, of beneficiaries. And there were projects in Africa, UN Village, where development experts tried to experiment with economy in small scales, how to develop small villages. They were improving a lot while these villages were getting the funds. But as soon as development experts left the country, the situation deteriorated abruptly. Now people are living in a more worse condition than the project was implemented. So do these people, the poor, should be considered as a public, or, sorry for rude metaphor, or like laboratory rats?
I think it is important for experts of whatever kind to remember that they are expert because they've been given that role by whoever wants their expertise. So you may know all sorts of things. You may be a scientist in your lab writing your papers, but that doesn't make you an expert yet. You are an expert when you start acting like an expert in a public context. And I think your development experts were forgetting that they were experts in the service of these people. And not just, you can't force your expertise on people. I think that would be one step at least towards.
These development experts imposing their ideas onto the people. So you're against this hierarchy.
No, I'm not. I'm not contradicting myself. I think once you've been given that role of expert, serving the people that give you that role with your expertise, then you're in that hierarchical relationship. But you have to remember, just like the government has been given this role by the voters. But still, in terms of government, there is a hierarchical relationship, and it makes no sense to pretend as if we're all in an equal democratic conversation about matters of expertise.
My question is for Lucy. In your concluding remarks, you said that science can be dangerous, but I think that depends how you implement scientific knowledge, and that's more of a political question than a scientific question. And likewise, what kind of experts we would like to raise in the next generation, I think that's also more or less a political or societal concern, not really something that would come from within the community of experts themselves, per se. How would you comment on that?
Yeah. May I repeat the question very quickly, because I think the microphone didn't pick this up. I think the gentleman was saying that when Lucy suggested that expertise or science may be a dangerous thing, this is a political decision rather than a decision of expertise.
Yeah, I agree with you. So perhaps a way to argue about that is that science is not, I agree it is a political issue or a societal issue, but since 1967, Thomas Kuhn argued that science is political, is connected to social issues, is connected to history, cultural values, and so on. So I guess my main argument is that we should consider how science is not detached from political agendas, from societal issues, and all these are very, very complex issues. So, yeah, science is not only about expertise. It's a much more complex system. And this is where the need for a more democratic and dialogical relationship with the public comes in.
Any more questions? Column here.
So I think this is for the proposition of the hierarchical thing. If we lived in a representative democracy and the representatives had to choose a path and they had to either trust the majority of experts or, let's say, 51% of the public in some hypothetical scenario, I think you proposed that we should trust experts and that the solution to this problem of the public not understanding the experts would be education, teaching the public how to reason properly. Isn't the issue that, let me just quickly...
Not just reasoning properly, but also understanding how science works.
It seems that all sides can find an expert to validate their point, which means that the experts, let's say economic experts who suggest that one path is beneficial, a bunch of other experts suggest the path is not beneficial. Since these experts were trained through the universities, isn't there a risk that we just kick the can down the road by educating the public, that a fair percentage of the public will just follow the path of the experts that choose the controversial path versus the large path, if the experts exist?
Not if the public accepts that there may be not if the public understands and has been taught by experts that in many disciplines, in many fields, it may be the case that there are different positions. If the public would accept that controversy is often a part of science, then the temptation to choose one side may be lessened.
I want to focus on something that you said in the first part of your comment, which you contradicted a bit in the second part. The fact that if we were to choose to trust the majority of experts, would we be better off than trusting of the public? And I'd like to argue that yes, choosing to trust the consensus of scientific community is very important, because you can always cherry pick your papers and your arguments. But if the community does not stand on the issue, then you might be misled. And that is it.
Trudy, next to you.
Oh, Trudy. Well, I've been hearing a lot of smart and interesting things tonight, so I'm very happy with this discussion by all kinds of people. But there's one thing that really bothers me, and that's the constant talk about the public. Here are the experts, and there is the public. I am public when I go to a baker's shop and buy my bread, and the baker is the expert. He knows or she knows what's in the bread, and when I ask what's in there, I should get an answer. And when I tell him or her I don't like the bread, it should be possible to have a discussion. When a cardiologist goes to a dermatologist, then the cardiologist, she is a patient and the public. So it's very, very complex to talk about public and experts, because our roles differ all the time. And in a way, it sounds so arrogant to me to constantly speak about the public and then have all kinds of opinions like, sorry, Petra, the public is only interested in having opinions, not informing them. Well, you should have said, oh, no, not everybody. I meet a lot of people who are not researchers, and they are so interested and so kind, and they want to reason and to argue. So
yeah,
it's much more complex than we tend to phrase it.
Yep. Thank you for that. That was going to be my closing comment. I was saving that. Yeah, but I want to push a bit further, and I would like to invite us all to rethink of how we conceptualize the public, because as you rightly said, scientists are part of the public. So what really makes the public? This room is full of publics. It's made up of a public, but in this public we have people with PhD in physics, we have people with a PhD in psychology and so on. So at any given time, the public is being reconceptualized, consisting of experts or not experts. So in 1 second we might be experts, as you said, but in another second we might not be experts. So I think even the language that we use, we, they, experts, the public, is problematic and is creating a dichotomy and a distance between people who have expertise and people who don't have expertise, and that by itself, by its nature, is elitist.
We completely agree, of course. So this hierarchical relationship that we've been pounding all the time is not between a fixed set of experts versus a fixed bunch of public. The roles shift all the time. Yeah. But in every case, that hierarchy is inevitable between you and the baker, or between the baker and the doctor, between the doctor and the physicist, or whatever.
Any more questions?
But you eat bread every day, don't you?
What? Come again?
You eat bread every day.
Yeah.
So doesn't that make you kind of like a bread connoisseur in the end?
I make my own bread.
Yeah. So, I was not expecting anything else.
Yeah, I have a question for the team against. So the proposition is, should the relationship between experts and the public be hierarchical? And based on what we just said, I was wondering what what are your counter arguments to this inevitable existence of a hierarchy and of a difference of power once there is someone who has more expertise than another person? Because what you seem to be pointing out, which I agree, is the fact that there is a problem in communication and about like how the process works and the education of the public, but how solving this neglects this inevitable hierarchy for you?
Well, currently, experts are hoarding the information and the tools available to create more knowledge. So I think that excuse me, do you mind repeating the question once again?
So, what is your counter argument, for just the debate's sake, to the statement that a difference in expertise is inevitably hierarchical, and how does making the expert communicating better what's behind the results neglects this hierarchy?
The title of this debate is called "We Are Tired of Experts," not "Down with Experts." We need experts to lead us into this new more equal level of communication, because after all, they are the ones still teaching us. There is no currently, you cannot be accredited to be an expert through the internet just yet. So until that becomes the reality, experts need to be there to guide us into this world, I feel. But they definitely need to change their attitude towards us.
May I react in a few sentences as well? I a little bit disagree. I don't think this hierarchy is as inevitable as we are talking about this. If, let's say I'm an expert, I don't consider myself an expert, but I hope when I will become an expert, I can keep this attitude. If I'm an expert and I'm talking to a person who is not an expert in that particular subject, my job will not be to tell that person, because I'm more superior than that person in that sense, to you have to do this and that. I am in that situation responsible for telling this person how it works and giving that person all of the tools to see it himself or herself, that my job is important and he can trust me. It's not just like I have to, like let's say if I'm an energy consultant and someone comes to me, I'm not gonna be like, you have to do this and that, like downwards, top down. My job and my responsibility as an expert is going to be to look at that person equally and try to explain why or how I'm doing the things I'm doing, and then he can make the choice of trusting my results or not. That's not hierarchy. We are equals in that conversation. I'm responsible in this situation to serve that person with my knowledge. That's not hierarchy.
I want to react to this with 2 points. First of all, I think there inevitably is a hierarchy whenever there is more knowledge and through that power, and an exchange of information is happening, and this power can move from one person to the other in this exchange. The second point is, do I still remember it? We're not arguing. So in what you previously said, you placed the responsibility on the expert to sort of educate and explain to any member what their research is about. And let me change perspectives on this and say that it is also partly the responsibility of whoever is talking to an expert to not blindly trust the authority of that person based on their expertise, but to trust the methods through which they arrived at those conclusions. And I think that can only happen with educating the public on how research is done and on critical skills on how to actually analyze that research to make sure is it good or not.
100% agree.
Can I add something to that? I actually disagree with that. I agree from a philosophical perspective, but from a practical perspective, I disagree because I think expertise is needed to address the needs of the public, and that fundamentally puts the public, places the public in a powerful position. From an even more practical perspective, the public consists of people who pay taxes, and this is where essentially the research grant, money for research grant comes from.
Thank you. Thank you, Petra, for the statement. I really like how you phrased that, forming an opinion and having an opinion. And thank you, Lucy, for how you replied. I think it was like the beautiful point that it's about actually having an evidence-based opinion. And it came out, though, actually in your response that even saying we and you, it's a problem, it creates a dichotomy. And I would like to have like some directions, like more practical examples. So we've been speaking really generally throughout all this debate. And I was wondering if you could give some remarks on how like a scientist should actually propose itself and talk in general.
Is the question directed to me personally? Yeah, I can offer a few examples. One example is to never have a TEDx talk event again, because a TEDx talk event puts scientists on a very powerful position and creates this hierarchical relationship with the public. I would argue for more events like this that are more open. They offer a sense of democracy where we take input. Input from the public is essential in these kind of conversations. I will argue for events like science festivals instead of writing for a popular science magazine, for example, in a way of trying to bring science in society in a very subtle way, where the we and the they cannot exist anymore. That scientists and the public blend in a very subtle kind of way. So bring science in places that are unexpected. And I will argue for things like put information about vaccination in a toilet at a pub, or place information about vaccination at a supermarket. For example, instead of organizing lectures that again position the scientist in a more powerful position than the public. More open spaces, bring science in places that are unexpected, that become essentially part of our everyday life. Outside of the university, for sure, ideally outside of these, of such rooms, more science in cafes, more science in pubs, in the streets, blend science with other disciplines, arts, for example, dance.
We really love this discussion, but we also love our freedom to be able to leave this building before they lock us in. So we're running out of time, even though we really would like to continue talking with you. I'm going to give both teams 30 seconds if they want to have any closing remarks before we wrap this event up. I'll start with the team to my right. It's not necessary. You have all spoken for very long today.
I've said this before. I think our positions are very close and have become even closer throughout the discussion. The only thing that we keep saying is, yes, take science closer to the public, bring it more into... don't do lectures stating facts, show the process, etc., etc. But we would maintain that there remains a core hierarchical relation inherent in expertise.
I'd like to just emphasize for everyone to look for the credible evidence yourself and be an active part of the scientific debate.
And my last point would be to, instead of thinking about bringing science to society, to start thinking about bringing society into science.
On these very, very good points, what I would like to do is I would like to thank you all for being here. I will maybe exercise my prerogative as host and holder of the last active microphone to say a couple of things to wrap this event up. What we were driven by when we chose this topic, and in all of its complexity and all of its difficulty in phrasing this statement and thus proposition, was our concern for what we understand as an increasing disconnect between these loose groups that we call the public and experts. This is particularly problematic, I think, in our view, or coupled very well with this rise of populism that we see around us, misinformation, and all of the examples that both teams have discussed today. Certainly, these two groups are not homogeneous. We both belong to either expert groups or non-expert groups. Let's use that instead of the term public. Not just on different occasions, but also, I think, crucially, and something that wasn't discussed, to very different degrees. Expertise is not a black and white issue, but it is also a matter of degrees. There are more expertly experts and more non-expertly non-experts, I would say. Skepticism is certainly not the characteristic, is not only a characteristic that belongs to experts, and neither is an interest in society's well-being and the well-being of our planet only the characteristic of the public. We each have a role in this relationship, and I think one of the things that we did today is we focused tremendously on how experts should engage in this relationship, but we only touched very briefly upon how non-experts have a responsibility in this relationship too, although we did certainly, both the audience and our two teams mentioned this a couple of times. I would like to close maybe by repeating a couple of things that I've heard from people. One is certainly that this matter, this relationship, and the world that we live in today is extremely complex. The amount of information that is being created and communicated on a millisecond basis right now is more than we've ever known in our human society, and certainly much more than an individual or even, I would say, a group of individuals is able to properly integrate. And more than any other time, the ability to deal with uncertainty, to deal with controversy, and to hold two beliefs or multiple beliefs simultaneously and not fall prey to some kind of notion of an absolute truth is important for all of us. I will also say that we always end these events by inviting those of you who are interested in continuing this discussion, perhaps a little bit longer, to join us with some alcoholic beverages, if that's what pleases you. We are in that little dot on the bottom middle, and we're going to walk around the building and go to Corps de Garde for just a little bit of time if you would like to join us. And I'm going to end this by thanking you very much for being here and hope to see you in future events, and thanking the two teams one more time. Thank you.